That was the perfect intro. Hey, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Ed Richter, and we are doing another installment of the SF for Life. What do we call what did we call this? A webinar. And with us we have Will Gunzelman, a member, and who is going to be talking about defense contracting and considerations for working overseas. And we're really fortunate to have him and excited to hear what he's got to share with us. Will, please take it away.
Okay. Uh, First of all, I'm Will Gunzelman. Started out my career in 1989. Went to DLI. Was an Intel guy for a couple of years. At 2.5 years in the Army, I went to the Q course or to selection, and then on to the Q course. It was an 18 Echo, an 18 Fox, 18 Zulu. Got my start at Fifth Special Forces Group with some phenomenal guys. I know I was watching something with JD was on, and I don't know if JD remembers me, but he was one of my mentors when I first started at Fifth Group. From there, I got an opportunity to go to another special operations unit as a commo guy, so I went there. Went back to Third Group to get some more team experience because I basically started out in SF with only 2.5 years in the Army. And then I went back over just before 9/11 and then worked some compartmented programs and spent the rest of my career until uh, 2017 over uh, working some different stuff. So anyway, that was my military career, and then after that, uh, I was offered an opportunity to work as a defense contractor, an armed defense contractor, doing counter IED work and so forth. So as I was telling Pete, re- I went on terminal leave in March of 2017, officially retired in June of 2017, and then in September of 2017, I was in Afghanistan. I was going to do like 3 trips. We were doing trips on and off, 4 months on, 4 months off. I was going to do 3 trips, and that was 8 years ago. So I still do some. The trips have slowed down, which is good because I'm getting older. Body armor gets heavier every year, but yeah. So armed defense contractor now, and then just kind of talking the course itself. So this particular piece that I'm going to talk about is part of a larger course on financial literacy for veterans that are transitioning out of the military. But the contractor piece specifically, as I started talking to guys, I was very fortunate. Uh, I didn't really seek out the job. I had a friend that was there. I went to work there, and it's a great organization, and everybody, all the little pieces and things that you don't think about were already taken care of. But a lot of the contracts aren't that way, and so I would just want to kind of tell everybody about the contract world and some of the things to keep in mind and consider whenever they decide they want to do some overseas contracting. I know back in the heyday, it's a lot of money and cool pictures and so forth, and it is a great life if you're working with the right folks and the right contracts. But there's some pitfalls if you don't. So that's kind of what uh, I intend to talk about today. A lot of the folks in this audience already have done a lot of this, so it's not designed as much to, kind of tell people the obvious, but hopefully to share, give some bullet points and so forth for those of us that have done some of this and the retired guys to be able to kind of use it as a recruiting tool and provide some of that information to the guys on active duty still that are should come over to the SF Association and so forth, and understand all that as they get ready to come out. So that's kind of the intent for everyone here, and then lastly, the whole premise of even setting up the veterans financial course that I put together was just came from talking with the guys on the contract and stuff, and I'd mention something, and they talk about doing this or that, and I'd say, well, there's no money in that, or you might want to look at this, and guys were like, because I also teach business strategy, so I would look at it from that lens, and then the guys were like, man, you need to write this down. We need to, guys need to know this. So that's how the bigger course came, and then this piece is just a quick snippet of that. which I will try and do in a short amount of time. But I'm here all night for any questions or anything after that. So, Pete, if you want to pull the slides up, I'll just talk through them. Yeah, they went back to the presenter mode, Pete. There we go. So again, just real quick, the title of this webinar is Considerations for Overseas Defense Contracting. And again, like I said, the intent is to inform Special Forces Association members that might be interested in the contracting world, and then increase the knowledge for the mentors as I talked about. A couple things I just want to hit tonight that are kind of highlights. There's a million things that all of us could collectively talk about, but some of the big pieces for guys to consider. So salary versus hours, the number of hours, and actually when your pay starts, and then global health care coverage and emergency medical plans, which I'll talk a little bit about that from even my own mistakes, which fortunately worked out, but things I discovered as I went to a developing nation that didn't have, it wasn't like the big base and so forth that we're used to working out of on defense contract stuff. Next slide, Pete, if you could. So again, I already explained an excerpt from a broader course inspired by fellow overseas contractors and kind of my credentials. I retired as an SF NCO. I'm an adjunct professor of strategy, business strategy, and armed overseas contractor. And the so what of the whole thing is that basically overseas contracting can be extremely rewarding or it could be a nightmare. So just some things to consider. Next slide, please. So salary versus hours. So this was always, even when I went through the TAPS program, nobody really can tell you how to figure out like, yeah, I get this much money, but if I was going to take an hourly job, what does that look like? And so uh, making sure that we share with those folks that don't understand the contract world. So they'll give you a contract. Let's say, hey, we're going to pay you $130,000 a year. And that's great, but then your hours will be billed hourly. So, what's that look like in terms of an hourly rate? And the same thing if you were going to go, be a carpenter or whatever, you take your salary from your military service and how you figure out what that looks like after. So basically, if you divide your salary, some companies use 2080, so 2,080 hours a year. Some will use 2,088, and that'll give you your hourly rate. And then, like I said, contracts are usually salary, but they're paid hourly. And why that matters, I'll get into in the next slide. Whenever you're ready, Pete. So now we'll talk about the number of hours and when pay starts. So I've got discussed number of paid hours per week, and that's for if I'm talking to the individual who's actually looking at some contract work. And why that's important is goes back to the hourly rate because, for example, your hourly rate might be 50, $60 an hour, whatever it is, 80, pick a number. But then that contract may only have 40 hours a week that you can work, or it may be a contract that has, you can work 60 or 80 hours a week or whatever it is. So that's going to change that salary. So you're going to have your normal salary, that's your annual salary, but if you're able to work more hours and so forth, obviously it's going to increase that number. The other piece to that for me is always I work it as a daily rate, right? So because everyone's priorities and their position in life is different. Even when I took the job that I have, I didn't look at it from the perspective of I'm so great. I'm an SF guy with all these skills and whatever. I looked at it as my wife and I looked at it as how much is our time worth? So like I've already retired. If I take this contract overseas, I'm going to be away from home. What does what's the price of that time away from home that my wife and I will never get back, right? So that was the cut line. And as I get older, that cut line keeps increasing, right, in my mind. So the big thing with that, though, is I say daily rate because looking at it from the perspective that I just discussed, to me, if I'm not home with my wife, I'm working. So, in other words, if Saturday or Sunday is not a paid day by the contract, in my mind, that really doesn't matter to me because I'm not home. It's a work day. So that means whatever my number of hours are for the week, let's say I normally get 50 hours, whatever it is. Now I'm going to divide that 50 hours by 7 days a week because there's 7 days in a week that I'm not home. And pretty soon, if you start doing that and looking at your daily rate, sometimes if you look at it that way, you might be better off to take something working stateside or whatever and take a part-time job and have the weekends with your family if you want or whatever. So everybody's situation is different. Some guys are like, hey, my mortgage and this cost me that, and I just need a number. I don't care if I'm working, you know, 7 days a week and I never see the family. We'll work that out. This is what I need in terms of salary. So everybody's got their different priorities, but it is something to consider because, like I said, if you're getting paid 50 hours a week and you're gone 7 days a week, you might be better off taking a lower salary on post in some defense contract job and then finding some part-time work because you're going to be gone 7 days a week if you're overseas. And then the beauty of that too is that part-time work, if your kids have a championship soccer or football game or something like that, you can actually say you can trade time for money, right? And say, well, I'm not working that day. I'm going to go watch my kids play. So you can't do that when you're overseas. All just things to think about. Then when does your full pay start, right? During travel, upon arrival, etc. So sometimes you'll have companies won't pay you at all for your travel. So that day or day and a half that it takes you to get to where you're going, you're not getting paid. Or they'll say, well, we're going to pay 8 hours a day there, and then maybe we pay 10 for the hours when you're in country. So all that again goes in. You spread all that money out, put it into your overall, and then divide it by your daily rate. And what's that look like, right? So again, everybody's is different, but how does that turn out for you in terms of what are you actually getting per day? Because a lot of times guys will find, depending on the contract you're on, especially for SF guys, you may be able to make as much money doing training events, help them with training and so forth in the States for, you know, any of the rates, 350 to 500, whatever it is a day, and be just as far ahead than you are going overseas and taking those risks and then having days off that you're not actually with family. So just things to consider. Then we'll talk uplift. So uplift is just a term used. It follows the State Department. It's an industry standard. Some places do it, some places don't. It's also something to ask about because some places, some contracts will have it where they include your uplift as your rate changes to where your pay is always the same, right? So you're basically getting less pay and it's augmented with this uplift. And uplift is either your danger pay or what I call sick pay, right? So austere conditions, there's a rate for that. And then there's a rate for hazardous hazardous duty pay, and it's based on basically what they pay the State Department guys. A lot of times, depending where you're at, uh, it's not going to start for 30 days. So you're going to do the first 30 days, you're not going to get any of it. Then when you start to get uplift, it's actually only paid 40 hours a week because basically State Department employees are paid on 40-hour weeks. So the industry standard follows that. So even though you may work every day, or as one of the guys jokes, because it's not dangerous on Saturday and Sunday, it's only dangerous the 5 days, whatever it is. But you're taking that risk the whole time. You're getting that uplift for that 40 hours, and it's just basically additional pay. Obviously, the more austere, the higher the rate. The more danger, the higher the rate. Uh, and that's where you start to hear some of these guys, even in the old times, of guys are getting $1,000 a day or $1,200 a day, and that can be true, but only in those zones, right? And so then it becomes, if you go to work for a big company, most of them will have you sign whatever you sign in your offer letter that you agree to go wherever they tell you. So you could do one rotation in a hazardous duty zone with, let's say 35% danger pay and 35% uh, of the what I call sick pay, the austere conditions. So you're getting 70% on that 40-hour week. And then next time they could tell you, well, you're going to you're going to do 4 months in this place that's nice to live in, but you're not going to get any uplift. So you're going to get straight pay during that rotation, which again is fine if you just need a number. But if you're kind of like, hey, I'm away from home and I'm not getting anything extra out of this, then it's something to consider. And then, like I said, when does that start? And after 30 days, so again, let's say you're doing a 4 month trip. If you're not getting paid anything extra for the first 30 days, then you're only getting paid for those last 90 days. Then you got to, again, take your daily rate based over your whole 120 days. And then what's that look like? Again, it's everybody's own priorities and where they're at. The intent is just to inform folks so they can make those decisions on what they want to do, and they can do some cost comparison when they get offers for different jobs, because sometimes, like I said, the money on the front end for some of these contracts looks really good, but when you break it down, it may not be much different than staying back in the States, or doing something in a less risky zone. Next slide, please. And then the same thing, global health coverage, right? So I did some research and I couldn't get a specific article or whatever that had a number, but I looked at several articles, and the top reason for U.S. bankruptcy is medical bills. And so you can have your house paid for and everything else and do some contract work, have a problem, and lose it all. So just things to think about. With that, most contracts do not provide military medical support, right? So I was just talking to Pete before it started that, for example, uh, I'm a retiree. So when I work overseas on a big base as a retiree, I'll be seen for any, boo-boos or any major things that I have by the military doctors there. But we had an individual, not on my contract, but within the company, who got out with like 10 years in service. He was an Air Force guy. And so he had to go in town in Africa to get his health care. So, and, you know, do they take his health insurance or does he have to be reimbursed and so forth? So, those are some things to think about. The same thing, even if you have TRICARE, I have TRICARE Select, so I can use my own doctors and I pay a copay, but because of my wife's insurance, we have two insurances, so I don't pay a copay. However, if you were on TRICARE Prime, it would be something to consider because you're potentially going to be somewhere where there's not a network. So what does that look like? It'd be something to call your TRICARE representative if you're going to work overseas and figure that out. Or you're going to have to buy some kind of global healthcare plan, right? Which is that third bullet. And so if that's the case, again, now you're deducting from your salary to pay for that global healthcare coverage to make sure that you don't go bankrupt in the process of doing great things for your country as a contractor. And so now your daily rate decreases again, right? So these are all things that you need to take into the math equation to figure out, is this contract worth it, or is there something else in one of these other offers as you get ready to leave the service that might be a better way to go. Um, like I said, I'm blessed enough to be on a good contract with a good company and so forth, but that's not always the case. And this is where the mistake I talked about or earlier. So some countries are so austere that they have what they call pay as you go. And what that means is they don't take any health insurance in these countries. They don't have a system set up for it or whatever. So I always use the example, not the, big gunfight, but I use the example of I'm riding a car, I'm going from the hotel to wherever we're training or whatever we're doing. I get T-boned at an intersection. I'm unconscious and I wake up in that country's hospital, right? Host nation hospital. And they tell me, hey, congratulations, you're going to be okay, uh, but your bill's $100,000 for medical, which is not very high anywhere in the world for any kind of trauma medical treatment. Well, in a pay-as-you-go country, they want their money. That you can file with your insurance company whenever. So it's a question to ask your company is like, hey, if this happens, who's writing that check for the $100,000 so that I can get my passport and fly home? You know, is that something I've got to figure out how to pay that myself? Is the company going to cover that? And then, I'll reimburse the company when I get reimbursed for my health insurance. How's that going to work, right? Because, like I said, sitting in the hospital room is not the time to start figuring out how you're going to come up with $100,000. Uh, and most people don't have 100 grand just laying around in the bank that they can throw at that problem set. So again, just something to consider. The healthcare thing, definitely know the ins and outs of the healthcare piece. Next slide, Pete, please. And then again, your emergency medical plans. Does the company have an emergency medical evacuation healthcare plan? So the same thing. Let's say I'm not waking up in the hospital there and I need to be aero medevaced from somewhere in the middle of Africa back to the United States. Well, that's a huge bill in itself. And maybe your health insurance doesn't even cover that, right? So if your health insurance doesn't cover it and the company's health insurance doesn't cover it, you're back in that same boat. You've now got, probably 150,000 at a minimum in a medical evacuation that you're going to be stuck with that bill. So definitely some things to consider because you can go backwards really quick. And going back to what I was talking about with the pay as you go. So I was asked to go to a country that was like that, austere. We didn't really have a base there. I was kind of in that mindset of back in the day of being a military guy. It's like, yeah, sure, I'll go there, no problem, cool. And then as I'm reading up on it, I'd already committed to it, so not backing out, right? Um, but as I was reading up on the country, that's when I came across the pay as you go, and fortunately, it all worked out and nothing happened. But uh, it was questions that I started asking the corporation when I got back was like, hey, I want to talk to somebody on high about what are we actually doing about this? Because the other piece too, even in the SF realm and so forth, a lot of these things are very niche. So you can have a contract with a major company and you're doing great things and you're an armed contractor or whatever, but you might be a small portion of that entire corporation and they may not have even thought of these things because it's not on their radar, right? They might have 100 guys, 150 guys that do what you're doing in these austere locations, but they've got 20,000 employees that don't do anything but show up at a base and go to work every day. So the time, energy, and effort that they're going to put into figuring that out is going to be minimal until you bring it up. And then they still may not have an answer and have to come up with one. So you definitely want to be asking about that. The other thing, when I actually had that conversation that came to light, was what's a definition of a work-related emergency, right? So, for example, the car crash that I talked about would be work-related. But depending on your company, if you had appendicitis and you had to be medevaced because of that as a very serious thing or a heart attack or anything like that, does that even fall in the realm of the company paying for that aero medevac? Or does that come back into your own, kind of like, is this a workman's comp case or is it not? Right. So also something to consider. And then if you're not sure and your company's not sure, they have plans out there. I haven't looked at them, but you can buy kind of SOS is a company that does it and so forth, and you could buy a plan for the time that you're gone to cover you. But again, not a big deal, but just understand that that's going to deduct from your salary and it's going to come into your overall daily rate. And then, as we already talked about, who pays for that overseas emergency bill? That who's writing that check for you to go home? So, next slide, Pete. So again, just some basic stuff to cover. We could probably talk all night on these things, but like I said, just know the facts before you commit. I mean, really grill, I mean, not grill them because you're obviously trying to get the job at the same time, and I understand all that, but have those questions maybe not necessarily in the interview, get the job or whatever, and then make your decisions after. But as soon as they give you a supervisor and who you're going to report to and things like that, uh, you definitely want to kind of bring those questions up and see if you can get some answers to those things. And if not, have your own plan for them, however you want to do that. Uh, this slide deck is part of, like I said, a bigger class, and so it's kind of partially not for this group, but partially for the broader audience that the deck goes to at times. There's the information there for the actual course. As I've said, everyone on the line here and anyone that watches the recording, you can reach out to me through Pete or whatever anytime, and we can set up to talk through any one of those slides on just basic financials to healthcare to whatever in terms of your transition, taxes, all that stuff. Um, but anyway, there's where to get the information. If you got folks outside of our community, again, I can't give it to everyone for nothing because I own the copyright to be able to talk about the materials like I'm doing tonight. But Liberty University actually spent the money to develop the online course. So if it's not our click and so forth, uh, if it's the broader, uh, like Ed, if you got guys that transitioning out from the 82nd or whatever, obviously if they just have a couple questions, send them my way. But if it's bigger piece, then I can't necessarily do it for all of the 82nd and so forth. So that makes sense to everyone. But other than that, I'll open it up to questions, and that's pretty much all I have.
Yeah, well, question, how much of this on contracts is negotiable? Say hey, this is the contract, it's not in there, and you bring these questions up. Uh, can you negotiate with the company about adding additional pay to cover that additional expense that they're not covering?
Yeah, yeah, you can, but again, you have to keep in mind that there's a lot of people. Depending, like again, if you're in a niche, like I always joke, even with my bosses, you can negotiate anything, right? And I joke with them every time they ask me something that's kind of out of the ordinary. I'm like, I'm a prima donna, right? You know, we're going to talk this out. I'm going to help you in the end, but we're going to figure out how this is best for everybody. Um, but if you're one of 500 people and there's 5,000 people trying to get that job, they're not going to entertain your negotiation. They're just going to say, "Hey, if we're not a fit for you, we'll go to the individual right behind you, and we'll just hire them." So again, things to think about. And then, but to your point, Pete, you can still argue it in the negotiation of the salary, right? So again, if I'll pick one of the top, I won't use a name, but pick one of the top companies that, I've got 20,000 employees. You're one of 150 that does this. I'm your boss. I run this program, but I'm not going to senior leaders of a 20,000 person company and ask them to retool the entire policy so that my 150 guys get this extra thing. But what I can do is say, you bring up a good point, Pete. Um, why don't you do a little research on what it'd cost you to get that medevac plan or to get whatever, and then we'll see if we can't build it into your salary. Because it's easier for me as a boss to just fight for your salary than it is to fight an entire policy change, right? So to your point, yes, it can be done. Just be just be aware of what you're asking for in terms of the bigger thing. It's you know how it is. We were just joking about it. When you're the E6, you don't understand all the things budget wise and problems wise that a sergeant major has. And when you ask for something, you're like, man, why couldn't he just do this? You know what I mean? Like, does seem hard to me. So just keep that in mind as you're doing the stuff. Because even talking to the guys, again, I teach business strategy, and even talking to the guys, sometimes they'll bring up like, why don't we do this? We could do this niche thing, and we could really do it. And I'm like, yeah, we could. And it might be, if you're looking at your paycheck, it's a $20 million gig, and that's awesome, you know. However, the company we work for is a $7.2 billion a year company. So even like I say with the armed contract stuff, we have to be careful. I tell the guys because it's a lot of risk for the company. And like I said, there's only a few of us doing this. So in the grand scheme of things, the company could easily say, let's just get rid of that business unit and send it off to, sell it off to some other company and give that headache to somebody else. I know it's a little more than what you asked for, Pete, but just to kind of provide context for folks that really, to your point, yes, you can do those, but do your homework on the front end for those things so that you can say, hey, my concern is this. Oh, you don't have that? Okay, cool. Well, I've already looked it up. And for me to do that, it's going to cost me about $2,000 a year or whatever. I don't know. I'm picking a number to actually have, a safety net if something happens. So is there a way that we could, kind of add that into my salary and let me take care of it? And those are things that if you're the right guy, again, 2 grand or whatever on a major salary probably isn't a stretch for them to do. And it's also, I think to your point, Pete, it's not it doesn't come off as an arrogant, well, I think I'm more than you, I'm worth more than you offered me. You know what I mean? It's a, hey, I'm trying to build these safety nets in. What you offered me is fine. I'm happy with that. I feel that's what I'm worth. However, for the sake of my family, these are some things that, I could use a little help on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sure does. A follow-up, because it's money related, and you mentioned that the contract may be 40 hours a week, 80 hours a week, or whatever. Uh, they're paying for you transportation there and back. Are there negotiations, or is it very spelled out on leave and time off while you're on that contract?
Yeah, most of the time it's pretty cut and dried on most of those. Like my contract's different, and most soft guys are going to get to those contracts that are more rotational. But I watch these guys, and some of these guys that do like what we call the field service representative work. So, somebody that works on a particular radio or a missile system or whatever. They're doing a year solid somewhere, and they're getting maybe 2 weeks in the first year. They get like 2 weeks of vacation time, so they're only coming back for 2 weeks out of the year. To your point too on the tax thing, just to add to that is sometimes these companies will say, well, with your tax break, you're making the equivalent of whatever, which you are, um, but you have to be, I think it's 335 days of the year you have to be out of the US. So even if you get 30 days of vacation time, you have to balance that because, one family emergency or whatever could cost you, 20 or $30,000 if you bust that 335 mark, and you end up with, a big tax, not a big tax, your normal taxes like you and I pay all the time, but you're not getting that tax exempt status once you break that. And some of the guys will have, uh, they'll have their families meet them somewhere else so that they're not coming back into the U.S. They'll do a vacation overseas or something like that to make sure they have that buffer if, grandma's getting sick or whatever. They have those days to be able to do that. But yeah, to your point, probably most of the time for those contracts, negotiating your vacation, absolutely can ask, but I don't know that, and I don't speak for all these companies, but again, it goes back to that policy thing, right? You're almost better to say, well, if I don't have that, is there a way I can get a little extra because I'm gonna end up taking a few days that I'm not gonna get paid for or whatever. Uh, does that make sense as well?
Yeah, it sure does. Anybody else? Renee, Bob? Anyone else have questions? Brandon?
Yeah, well, um, how the company's logistics? How's the kit that you get? Everything you need, or some better than others? One question. Second question, security clearances. Just secret, or do you have to go higher on these things?
Yeah. So to answer the first question, you bring up a good point. because like I said, I went to work for a good company that the guys took care of things. But our kit is solid, and uh, when we were working as a bigger contract, we had more of a supply because you know a lot of it is government furnished stuff, so you're getting your batteries for your optics and all, you know, slings and all those kinds of things and equipment. Some issued, some bought by the company. Some of the, you know, if you want better stuff, a lot of times the companies will buy that. Um, but then you get to more austere, smaller contracts, and you may not get the government furnished support in the same manner that you did when you had, you know, the bigger contracts and there's a basically you have your own logistics folks, but they're working hand in hand with the government logistics to get your stuff on an aircraft and get it over there, or to, you know, uh, obviously we don't ship the guns, we don't ship that, and the guns are usually government guns anyway. Like most, the government's not going to let. Well, I'm not saying they're not going to let, but rarely are they going to have guys using, you know, whatever off the shelf. And the second piece of that is getting it fixed, right? To your point. So the logistics of using, you know, an M4 that's issued by the government means that when the bolt cracks or whatever, they'll fix it. They've got the parts, they've got everything. It's not going, you know, all the way back to the States to your logistics hub and so forth. Um, and then your second question again?
Yeah, sorry. Security
Oh,
clearances,
clearances, yeah. So
average contract, secret, or you got to go higher?
uh, average contract is secret. The money is in the TS SCI contracts, and the real money is in the TS SCI with a poly. So if you got guys that are leaders out there, if there's a way that they can get that for their guys and so forth to get to the TS and so forth. Obviously, everything's got billets and so forth, but a lot of times guys are working in places where they potentially could have that billet while they're still active duty, but they don't pursue it for whatever reason at their level. Obviously, nobody wants to do it because it's expensive for the background check as far as senior leaders. But sometimes you're working with stuff that's that way, and so you can kind of make sure that you or your guys are getting that TS SCI clearance. And then you definitely want to go to work for somebody that can maintain that clearance when you get out, right? So uh, you might, and that's another thing too, is you might take that uh, lesser job when you get out, because I think it only a TSSCI is only good for like a year or something like that after, and then it goes inactive. So that's also something to consider of when you're looking at employment is, yeah, that dream job hasn't come out yet, but you know, my time is dwindling, so I'm going to take this job over here that requires the TSSCI. And even though it doesn't pay what I'd like it to pay or whatever, they're going to hold my clearance. They're going to keep my clearance up. And then because of that, it stays active. And if a year from now, the job that I really want comes open, I'm actually still able to get that job. So does that help, Bob?
Yeah. Um, just, better than I, but the billet, um, it is a clearance. You go to the billet and the clearance is maintained, say from DOD over to whatever, Beltway contractor. They they maintain the billet. You go into it and there's no cost. And that's a key thing.
Yeah.
If you try to get one of these jobs without a high clearance, it costs money, it takes time. So the team that thing with you off active duty or from contract to contract.
Yeah, absolutely. So contract to contract, they'll pick it up because again, the other thing is it's the business world, right? So they can bill more, they can get more for your work if you have that TS SCI clearance for those jobs. So they're gonna try and maintain it both for you and the company if you switch is going to grab that clearance up and take it. And they have, you know, there's always a it's I always get these backwards, but you've got your SSO, who's a government official, and then you have basically the same equivalent in whatever company you're working for that's maintaining all the clearance stuff, doing your updates, doing all that, and then keeping that clearance for you. And then, like I said, you switch over to another company, it's all still at the DoD clearance, system. They can look you up and move you over to the next one. Does that does that help?
Roger that.
And
Thank
Brand,
you.
oh,
Thank you.
and Brandon just asked a question about any websites or online forums you recommend that have current contract positions that are open. Uh, I can answer part of that. Our SFA Team House
Hmm.
for all SFA members. We have a soft net that you can sign up for where people put all those positions, all guys from different companies, put it on that list, and you can get emailed out that list or to check that out online. I'll look for that link. Will, do you know of any others?
I've heard there's something like Dangerous Jobs or something like that is out there. There's another one I think, or at least it used to be, Pete, that I'll try and find the link to. Uh, that's a great question, and sadly, I've been blessed to never actually like look for a job. So I was approached by guys that just happen to be working the contract I'm on. I've not left it. It's a good company, so I haven't really done a lot of searching for uh, other other contract employment stuff. But I know Dangerous Jobs has some stuff that's a lot of times short term, and then there's some others. Like I said, this other one that used to have a pretty good list of stuff. I probably got an old email somewhere that's got it. But I know through the team house is probably your best bet. If I know he's on some of the same chat groups and so forth that I am. That guys will send stuff out. Hey, I, really looking for somebody for this and that and whatever. And the biggest thing is the bona fides, right? So if it's coming back through one of these things, guys are probably going to give you an interview. You know, if you're just another name in the hat throwing something on a website for a large company, it can be hit or miss. And I'll be honest, I've seen some good guys that have done it that way. That over time they've come to work with us or whatever, and they've said, "Yeah, I was put my stuff in with this company to do this thing and never heard back," or you know, the questions they asked on the interview were kind of weird, and I didn't really know, and it didn't go well. I mean, there's a million reasons, but usually working through like Pete and guys are probably the best bet. I'm not saying don't do it the other way. Absolutely, put it out there as much as you can. I'm like I said, I'm horrible to ask that. I don't have LinkedIn. I'm not on Facebook. I don't. I'm like I understand technology. I just don't use it a lot. So um, I'm someone else in the room probably has a better grasp of where to look for that
Yeah,
stuff.
and
Sorry
on
for
that
that.
note, I'm on both Facebook and on the other. And a lot of jobs get posted. There's a SF team room. There's different SF related sites where people that work for different companies will put a post, "Hey, my company's hiring this," and they'll put the blast into that Facebook group. I did a quick look. There's a clearancejobs.com site for a variety of jobs. And you can just Google it pretty much. SOCOM, it's got a join us where they have different career opportunities, silent professionals, quiet professionals. There's a whole bunch of companies that have been started by SF guys that promote that kind of stuff. So you can also Google it as well.
And I will tell you, quiet. If you go in individual companies, quiet professionals. Andy Wilson runs that. Former SF guy. That's not the company I work for, but good guy, good company from everything. I know Andy's a good guy, and obviously it's the business world, but I know guys that work for him that uh, are happy. So that's one to definitely take a look at.
Yeah, great questions. Anyone else? Got a few more minutes available. Yeah, sure thing, Brendan. Hey, one other just comment I'll throw out there. Uh, through SF and soft type networking, there's been people that have been stranded. They had a heart attack and died in the Philippines or wherever while they were on a contract, and they didn't have anything set up for that. People have reached out with GoFundMe sites and guys reaching out to the community to help. And SFA has been a big part of that. The Green Beret Foundation, the Special Forces Trust, Special Forces Foundation, a whole bunch of folks that kind of take care of our own out there when an emergency arises that there is no plan for. So it's not the end of the world to go bankrupt. There's folks out there that will go out and help. But Will brought up some great points to take into consideration for those contracts.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Pete, that because yeah, a lot of having the folks to be able to help out. And the other piece too is, in the big companies and even with the government and in the military, if you're working for the broader military, they will just, when something happens, they're just like, hey, that's a contractor. They need to call their company. And it could be exactly that. Like, how do we get this body? This person died, but how do we get this body back home? And the military will say, well, that's the company's issue. But uh, through guys like Pete and the organizations, not just from a funding standpoint, but they probably know somebody. Nobody's going to do anything illegal, immoral, or unethical, but you also have to care, and they'll find the guys that are still active that care that will try to help out and make it work. I know we had a guy killed, and I won't go into who, but the soft community treated him like one of their own, like he was still one of ours, and it was actually pretty phenomenal. But that's rare, so the network will do that for you before anyone else will.
All right. Any last questions? Well, this has been recorded. It will be saved and posted to the Team House site to share with others that may have missed this opportunity. The slides will be uploaded also to the Team House, to the document library, and we'll make sure that folks know where to find this info.
One last thing, Pete. I also, for the guys, the slide deck will be there, but I think I sent it to you, Pete. And if I didn't, I'll send you the link again. But I also have this in a very condensed 6 or 8 minute video audio program, so that guys can do a quick hit on that too. So they have that as well. But it's a link because it's too big to. So you got to go to the Liberty link, but you just click on the link and then you can listen to it's basically PowerPoint with audio on it and it runs as a video. So, but thanks everyone for all you do and continue to do. I really appreciate it.